Great. Okay, so we got some of our frequent flyers. We've also got some new faces, so welcome everyone. And we are here to talk about the real drafts for the new renewed program review processes. And we've also got in total 3 sections. And just to give us a little, level setting here, we've been, this is first open forum that we've had in quite a few months, except for, I think we had a very brief one earlier this year, but we did have open forums every 2 weeks last fall. And that was to get very specific input on the development of AICS program review procedures, which are the administrative code, chapter 300, and all that's the numbers that we've seen. So based on that initial input and development, which many of you participated in, we are planning to bring forward 3 polished versions for the commission to consider at its meeting in June. So those 3, we'll talk about all 3 today. The first one is 300-103, the proposals for new academic programs. The big intervention with that one is that we would be doing away with the NISP. I know some folks have been interested in that for a while, so that is the main intervention there. The second one is 300-104. This one is, we're going to be enhancing it to really focus on post-implementation reporting. Up until now, it kind of mentioned that casually among actions that the commission can take on programs, but we want to put in our policies the practice that we're actually doing in meetings. And then the third one would be a completely new section. If it goes through, it would be 300-111. And that section is on instructional role and changes to academic units. Academic units have been kind of thrown in there with academic programs up until this point, and we wanted to be more recognize that there are differences there, and there's a whole process for proposing a new program where a new academic unit doesn't need to go through that same level of scrutiny. Okay, so our plan today is to talk through each of those new, the language that we're hoping to consider, answer your questions, get your input. If anybody says, whoa, Nellie, this is really just not a good idea, then you would want, now is your time to tell us those sort of things. And in terms of feedback, obviously this is, an open forum. We'll post it to AICS website under webinars in case you want to review it or anyone else on your team wants to review it. And we will be meeting with the Academic Affairs Committee of the Commission. They met briefly just after the last AIC meeting back in March to get a sense of the work that we all have been doing and understand the directions that this is going to take. So they'll be reviewing a revised version of what we talk about today. Hopefully, I think it'll be 2 weeks from now, ahead of the June meeting. And at the June meeting, the commission would consider preliminary approval for these 3 changes if we move forward with those. And preliminary approval means they're conceptually on board with making the change, and that triggers a process with the state to post the proposed changes to the official register of administrative procedures. And that notification goes out much more broadly than just higher education. It's part of overall transparency efforts. And the proposed changes will be up in that very public process for review over the summer. I think the state has to be at least 45 days, but we would certainly be over that. And then any changes that would come in over the summer might cause us to make, adjustments to the policies that we would bring forward at the commission meeting in September for final approval. And if the commission approves them in September, then they would become part of AIC's administrative code. And we would be able to operate using these new procedures, which means, of course, in the subject of new academic program proposals, if we're getting rid of the NISP, there's going to be new forms and a slightly new process, which hopefully will be welcomed by everyone as more streamlined and efficient. And we've already got some ideas about what that would look like. So we do need the policies in place before we can actually transition to that more streamlined process. Okay, so that was some overview of our timelines. Do you all have any questions on that time frame and also just the general scope of the work that we're engaged in?
Robin, if the changes are formally approved in September, I know you had mentioned, changes to forms and things like that. When would you anticipate that we could officially start using that process?
Well, you all know that the programs that we would consider at the September meeting come through in June. So we won't be ready for that. I do think if everything is looking like it's good to go, we may be able to release the forms ahead of the deadlines in September. I think that might be slightly ambitious. So really we would be looking at, socializing the forms and getting everybody familiar with them and on board over the fall, with the goal of the due dates that are in December. For the March meeting would be the first meeting where those forms are the standard forms.
Thank you.
Okay, more questions? I will say on the forms though that we are going to be going through a process of making sure everybody knows what to do with forms. It's not going to be a kind of all or nothing. There will be a transition period where some proposals have been developed on old forms. We'll accept them in that fashion. So, definitely don't expect us to, cut off the work that you've already been doing. So you will. Got a couple more folks joining. All right, well, shall we get started? So I budgeted an hour and a half for this meeting because I expected that when, you get a lot more questions once you have real live language on the table versus the conceptual activity of thinking about what we could talk about. The one that is probably the most changed since we talked about these policies previously is the one on instructional role, just because that was in a very developmental stage when we previously spoke about it. And so I want to propose us talking about that one first, because I know that several of the institutions on the call are interested in that policy. So I don't want to give it a short shrift at the end if it's the last one and we don't have enough time. So I'm going to start with that one. Then we'll do the new academic programs and then the post-implementation. Okay, good to go. Well, let's get started here. I'm going to share my screen. All right, so what y'all are looking at right now is AIC's public forum page. Okay, so anybody who wants to follow along, you're welcome to. Public forum. And this is where we post all the new program proposals that are up for the next meeting. So we've got quite a lot of work ahead of us. With the June meeting, there are going to be a number of them up. And then we posted the language for the new proposal, new administrative policies up here at the top, and we'll continue to do that. Just so you know, once this actually goes through a preliminary approval, right, in June, then there will be moving to that official state process, and AIC will post the official to be considered versions here, but we'll also post them here. which is a page that we don't use that often. But this has, right now, the changes have to do with one of our loan programs. Our proposed changes will appear here once the commission has reviewed them. And then they will also appear on the official administrative code review page. Okay, so like I said, we're gonna check on the instructional roles section first. All right, can y'all all see what I'm seeing? Okay, so on this table of contents, you can see this is of the entire program review section. We are going to be talking first about this one. The open forum for that was held back in December. Right, and this just talks about how the document was put together and a synopsis of what we're doing. If you want to check out the open forum, please do. And then there is a clean draft. So namely, this is how the policy would appear, depending on what changes we make. And then go a little bit farther and you've got, okay, a little bit farther, marked up draft. So this shows you in red, new language that we've created. The blue cross out is language that existed that we've decided to get rid of. And most of the blue language in this particular policy, like I said, it's a new policy, comes from a guidelines document, guidelines for instructional role. And that is actually included in this package should you all want to refer to it. But we show where that language would have gone and then talk through what we are proposing instead. And we'll go through all of this and just orienting you all to the document. There's some language in blue that is not stricken. There we go, stricken through, struck through. Anyway, it's still there. So that there's some from the old policy we're keeping. And then changes to academic units is kind of, we shift gears here. And the language that's in blue from this section is mostly from extensions and alterations or from definitions sections. All right, here's the full guidelines. As you can see, they were for 5 years. They expired in 2019. We've been operating under these guidelines since then, but we believe it really makes sense to codify these into the regular policies. But if anybody wants to see this, you'll see that some of the organization has been changed. It includes some elements that relate specifically to program review. So this section right here, for instance, proposed higher degree program in a single discipline. This section has been taken out of the policy and actually put in the program review, like new program proposal section. So you'll see that there once we get to that. All right, and then finally, we also, here's our matrix. This is another thing we'll talk about. This was part of the guidelines and had been part of AIC's thinking up until this point, is that instructional role has to do with a particular degree level and a particular set of related SIP codes or SIP categories. And so the instructional role had to do with this particular matrix. And you'll see from the new recommended language, we're moving away from that. It just seems to be too in the weeds and doesn't necessarily recognize the way interdisciplinary programs work. And yeah, it's difficult to maintain. Okay. Finally, we included, for reference sake, SAC's policy on accreditation at higher or lower degree level, which I'm sure is always on you all's mind as you're considering any instructional role. Okay. All right, questions on the document before we get into the actual flow? No. Okay, So I'm gonna, in order to show everything, I'm gonna go through this using the marked up version. And I know it's a little bit more difficult to read because of the underlines, but in the name of transparency, we want y'all to know what we've chosen to exclude. And please do stop me at any point should you have questions or want to know more. Tried to put some commentary inside the document to help you understand where there have been specific decisions that were made. Right, so we're adding for this policy, obviously it's new, but in keeping with the form of other 8 policies, it starts with a purpose, commission responsibility and scope. And instructional role has to do with language given to AIC about evaluating institutional missions and roles and advising the legislature on those sorts of things, which is captured here in our responsibility. As I mentioned a minute ago, we're going through definitions. This policy is organized in kind of 2 basic sections, one related to instructional role, and then toward the end about new academic units. So for instructional role, the previous definition that came from the guidelines, as I mentioned, had the matrix as the kind of core element of instructional role. So is defined as subdivision groupings and award levels pertain to each institution. It goes through how the cells are filled out, and so we're simplifying that and defining instructional role instead by degree levels. So keeping the level part of it, getting rid of the SIP part of it, and similar to SACS, suggesting that when you're approved at a certain level, it doesn't automatically include the lower level. And hopefully all that seems familiar. But when we say degree level, here is what we mean. So for the most part, this will overlap with what you all are familiar with from SACS. Associate degree, baccalaureate degree, master's degree, education specialist degree. Where it diverges, SACS has a stronger interest in the number of doctoral degrees. And I would say that the state, and the commission being kind of an agent of the state, is interested in the nature of the degree, whether it is practice focused or research focused. So this is I won't say unprecedented definition, because it certainly in this case kind of brings in some awareness that we have of the Carnegie classifications, the ways that institutions are understood to have professional or practice focused doctorates for certain doctoral granting institutions versus your R1s and R2s, research focused doctorate institutions. And the idea with this definition is to try and bring that together with what the state is wanting to do. We obviously know that this diverges a little bit from what SACS is doing, because they are counting numbers of doctorates, not actually which kind of doctorates they are. But we can talk more about the impact of this definition there. But I do want to invite questions on what the definition is, and also input if you all think we're headed the right direction.
Robin, are you good with input right now? And this, Marianne, you know where I'm going with this, so it's not, I've already given the feedback. The concern we have is, and I
You're
think
from Troy, right?
Troy, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry. The concern we have is, and I think, and I could be wrong, we're the only institution at this point of having 3 doctorates at this time for 2 years. So we're the only, and again, I may be misspeaking there, that would be ready to do this. So our planning for the last several years has been based on this 2015 to 19 policy. And where we're at right now is it has already suddenly put a stop to the plans we've been making for a really long time because of the practitioner versus research. And we have, for everybody else to know, we have two PhD research and we have one practitioner. And so where it's going to impact us long-term, unless we make a second move to another role change years down the line, is, until you get research Carnegie classification, you're not eligible for certain grants. There's a lot of things that come into that, but we would not even be able to start pursuing those things or R2 if we can't have the PhD research doctorates to do that. And that's a concern. Just because, again, it impacts us in a couple of ways based on how we've planned as we've built these doctoral degrees over the last years and things like that. Also because the area of the state we're in and things like that, we have one R2 in the state of Alabama right now. And so statewide, I guess my fear would be it's putting us off from having more R2s that serve a certain population. With us, it's adult students and things like that who might want a smaller school that's nearby or something like that if we're not able to move forward with that.
Great, thank you. And I do think some of that is worth talking about as we get further down to the actual, what it is going to take to get to the role expansion. And we'll definitely circle back on that. But it does sound like, at least from Troy's perspective, the distinction between practice and research focused doctorate might, is going to create potential hiccups with the way that the institution wants to grow. But the definition seems to be something that y'all, like, is this something that is recognized? Like, do your faculty understand it?
The definitions in and of themselves aren't a problem. It's having to be one or the other. So you're either a research granting doctoral institution or a practitioner based. And so, we have a practitioner degree. We recognize it as a practitioner degree and things like that. But when we're working with externals, especially with grants and things like that, you need to have that research focus at times, especially with certain things. So the definitions in and of themselves are not the issue. It's separating it out and preventing from being able to move forward based on the policy that we've been using for years. And again, I think we're just in a very different situation, because if we were 5 years out from that, then you could adjust, but we're like right here, right now kind of thing. And that's where the concern is.
Gotcha.
And I think to Mary Ann's point, Alabama State's also, we using the definitions of research dollars and doctoral production, we've inched ever closer to R2 status. We're very close ourselves. I don't think we don't talk about it much. I don't think you're talking about it much outside of your own campus either, Mary Ann. But that is important for us all to make sure that we're not, as the saying goes, pulling the ladder up behind us. Unless there's just I think it's also fair to know if this is an agenda to manage all of that we're only going to have like 1 or 2 R2s in the state. If that's kind of the strategic goal out of
Hey
all
guys,
this.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I have a question about that, just kind of following up. So at UNA, we have 2 doctorates that are practice focused. So the EDBA and then the DNP. And we also have a research focused doctorate, which is the PhD in exercise science. And so I think the way I'm understanding it and reading it, Robin, and correct me if I'm wrong, is I don't know that this would limit us from ever changing to a, let's say time, moves forward and some opportunities come along for us to get more infusion of funds and research-based faculty, that this would ever, I hope it wouldn't put us into a corner, knowing that probably we're very workforce development focused, and it probably will be mostly practice-based doctorates that we're proposing, at least in the immediate future. I hope that that wouldn't then prevent us at, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, or whatever, changing our focus to be more research focused doctoral granting program. That it would just help us if we're going to focus right now, and that's where our mission is at right now, is on the practice base. It wouldn't limit us from adding those. It just would allow us to expand within that area. And if we wanted a level change to be a more research focused doctoral granting institution, that we would have that opportunity at a later time. Like, this wouldn't put us in a box we don't get out of, I guess. I want to just make sure, because that's how I read it, is that it gives us more, freedom if we want to, focus in on workforce development. And that means more practice focused doctorates at this time. It wouldn't limit us to only having 3 or 4 of those. We could continue along those lines, but if anytime we wanted to change our level to be an R1 institution, that we would have to do some things
Mhm.
and
Yes.
demonstrate that we're
And
ready and
that's-
prepared for that.
Right, that's the intention. So one thing to clarify is that AIC has no role or say in your institution's R1, R2 Carnegie various status. And I am not familiar enough with that process to know whether they ask for documentation of instructional role, but I see Mary Ann shaking her head. So I do want to kind of echo and clarify and say that whatever we decide here, your institution can continue to grow and continue to gain research dollars and produce graduates. And Carnegie isn't going to look at whether you're a practice doctorate or a research doctorate institution in the state of Alabama. So
But they will-
that's true.
But where it does limit, and again, where we are, but where it does limit is if we're limited to the number of PhDs, getting those number of research doctorates awarded within the year of review, that's where it's limiting. And that's where it comes into play with grants in the future and things like that. So, and Amber's exactly right. So if we just wanted to do practitioner-based degrees, then we could roll change up to that practitioner-based and be a doctoral granting institution within the state based on the practitioner base. The research base is for a couple of reasons, but one being that's our goal, and then 2, that R2. So yes, AIC has nothing to do with whether or not you make R2, but you have to have met those certain qualifications to get R2. And this can kind of, depending on where you are, and again, this might be specific to us at this very moment, but depending on where you are, this can have a big impact.
Okay, well, let's go down to the details. That way everybody's clear on what the potential impact of these definitions are. Okay, so role expansion. So like you can see from this document with all the cross out, the role expansion used to be about expanding your cells on the matrix to have different degree levels and different SIP areas. All right, so this would be role expansion. New definition is more like what we might see, or hopefully more familiar with practices that you all have used with SACS. Ability to develop and implement academic programs at a different degree level than previously awarded. So once the role expansion is approved, the institution can bring forward new program proposals without strategic benefit. So that's something we're going to talk about under the program review. But let's say that strategic benefit, and we do talk about it a little bit below here, is a higher level of scrutiny on a program. Whereas if a program is in your role, let's say you are a master's granting institution, you bring forward a master's degree, that's in your role. And so it is reviewed. The scrutiny on duplication and resources and other things is less when it's a part of your role versus when it is a reach and outside your role. That's when it tips off the strategic benefit. So if an institution moves from, well, the most recent one was Athens State moved from baccalaureate to a master's degree. Up until that point, they had to bring forward master's degree proposals only through strategic benefit review. And then once they got it, they were able to bring forward more. So some of the examples that we've been talking about up to this point with Troy and UNA and ASU, I believe all of those are currently ed specialist degree granting institutions. And so any doctoral program proposals are reviewed at the strategic benefit threshold. And so if you all were to go back and look at AIC's agendas for any time Troy or UNA, ASU, and some of the others have brought forward doctoral proposals, because they have come forward, they get reviewed at that strategic benefit, and that's pretty clear in AIC's documentation. So if there were a role change from education specialist to practice focus, this would open up that normal level of scrutiny for the degrees in that band. So if you were to move from ed specialist to practice focused doctorate, then you would be able to bring forward more practice focused doctorates. That would also mean, and I think this is where Marianne is going, if you were to become a practice focused doctoral institution, you would still need to choose strategic benefit for your research focused doctorates. Until an institution became a research focused doctorate granting as part of its instructional role. Okay, so there is a pathway for bringing forward new degrees. It's just, it has that strategic benefit, which is the current, which is the state, the way things are currently existing for the institutions. All right, so to get a little more specific, so then the next sections are about eligibility for expanding. So there is one set of standards up to practice focused, is the proposal. And then we'll see that there is a slightly different one for the research. So for the practice focus, like I said, there's got to be some alignment with your institution's mission. This has to do with language that's included in the statute authorizing your institution by the legislature, which AIC is not controlling. So as long as your institutional role or mission as prescribed by the legislature can accommodate the higher role, then you're eligible to bring forth the proposal. You have to have 3 successful implementations at the higher degree level before you can propose. And then this would be a big change, which is actually opening up flexibility on the practical doctorate side. The guidelines, so this language is all from the guidelines, requires that if you have 3, you can't get a 4th one until you go through the role change process. So by proposing to eliminate this, that means that an institution who wants to do more practice-focused doctorates could now have different choices they can make. They could bring forward a 4th practice-focused doctorate using strategic benefit, or a 5th. They could also pursue the role change. So whereas before there had to be a time delay between the 3rd and the 4th, you had to wait to show successful implementation before you could ever do a 4th. Now this opens up a little more flexibility around that transition between 3 and 4 practice doctorates. Okay, y'all with me so far? Okay, do I have questions on the practice piece? Because I think most of the questions we've heard up to this point, which we'll get into some more, have to do with this next section, which is about research doctorates. Okay. All right, so on to the research doctorates. So for the instructional role to include research doctorates. So the list of institutions that are identified as having a research doctorate, you can see it's in blue because it was already included in the previous guidelines. And there are other precedents, including the way that AIC had done its previous standard calculation for budget formatting, and these 7 institutions received that higher doctoral calculation. And specifically, that standard budget calculation isn't, it's used as information only, but it had to do with the additional costs that are associated with having research doctorates, that they need more investment, TAs, labs, all of the associated things that go along with producing research was the thinking behind that. Okay, so these institutions are already known to be in that category. So for you guys at ASU, you may be reaching out to R2, but for the purposes of states of Alabama, you guys are already considered a research-focused doctorate institution.
Yeah, no, and I should make very clear, I don't want anyone to feel limited in our state. You know, if the state, if the governor's office, we take, well, you know, we always have to talk about these things that, you know, if we want to have especially more technology in some of these, you know, we want to increase our, you know, bringing that kind of exposure to our state, the kind of technology and science that we continue to need. And of course, in health sciences, and I guess some of those are on the practice-oriented side, I don't want any institution that could build that capacity to be closed out of the ability to do that. There's, you know, there's a lot of reasons, of course, we all know those. So, you know, I'm not trying to, it's no secret, trying ASU, we have our little battles once in a while, but I'm not trying to say that Troy should not, you know, have some things. I mean, we're on this list, and I know this because of the Knight case. I mean, that's the reason A&M and ASU are on here, and we're grateful to be on the list. So anyway, that's just my 2 cents about it.
History and precedent and all of those
Right.
went into the building of this list, which was not
No,
an
I'm
arbitrary thing on the part of AIC. So
no. That's absolutely true. So I just want, I just see also, you know, the report, when you talk about this, what, you know, Marianne, what you were talking about, and I don't know what your, you know, research degree aspirations are, but I think about the needs of our state, and, you know, that there's to me a lot of room for other than especially the UA system, as we'll refer to it, and Auburn to produce some of this research. And we all partner with them already, you know, but anyway, that's my 2 cents. I love all of everybody.
yes, thank you, Rena. All right, so let's go through these. So there is a path for other institutions than just these 7 to expand their instructional role. Okay, so here's what we got for that path. So first, they have to do legislative approval to expand the role. Again, this has to do with the statutory authorization of your institution. Your institution's general counsel will know the answer to this question. And AIC just, you know, is the one kind of checking to make sure that that has already taken place. All right, so then we get to, this is actually recognizing the current, it's using the current process and applying it to the research doctorate. So the institution must successfully implement, it should be 3, the word 3 should be in here, 3 research doctorate programs before it can request the expansion of instructional role to include research-focused doctorates. And then all this language about what successful implementation is about the 2 years of implementation information, enrollment assessment, and how the program is doing and growing. This has to do with viability. So those up until for the first 3, let's go. So successfully implement 3 research-focused doctorate programs. Those are all going to go through AIC's approval process through strategic benefit, that higher threshold of review. And then here is where that old, you know, the one that we took out for the practice doctorates we are proposing keeping it for research doctorates, which is that a fourth research doctorate would require the role change to include research doctorates. So there could be 3 approved through strategic benefit, and then the 4th would need this additional process from me. And lastly, the other thing is just this differential budget consideration. There was all this language in the previous guidelines about the AIC standard calculation and how it was working. And like I said, that calculation is really informational only. And that is what this is intended to summarize without all of this other language here. Okay, so in the example that Marianne has brought up, Troy is in a situation where there are 3 doctorates, but 2 research and 1 practice. And so there could be 1 other research to go up through strategic benefit, potentially future practice doctorates through strategic benefit, but that doesn't really seem to be the concern that you're raising, Marianne. Is that right? Right. So the question that you're bringing up is, well, first, is it that you were wanting the role change to occur earlier, or that you were wanting the role change or wanting additional programs through strategic benefit before going through the role change process?
What we were wanting to do and what we've been working through, again, because our third doctorate, second research doctorate hit that 2-year mark in fall. So what we started working on in fall was putting together the documentation for role change. So right as this new policy has been written, we started writing for role change because, one, it's a good incentive for our faculty. It obviously helps with recruiting new faculty that, hey, we're on this path that we're looking for more research to be done and to grow. We're building this new research building and all these other things. So it just kind of made sense to go ahead and start writing that document for role change because we were eligible as of end of fall semester to do so. And so that has kind of been part of our strategic plan for, not the official strategic plan, but what we've been planning for a good bit now. And we were just waiting to hit that mark of 2 years to be able to put that document forward. So the concern now is that, yes, we could do 1 more PhD, research PhD, but it puts us off from being able to do that research role change by the time you write for the 3rd PhD and then 2 years of post-implementation. It puts this goal of ours off by at least 3 to 4 years at this point when we had just started writing it. So it's just part of it is just this was what we were working on and now trying to reevaluate, okay, where do we go from here? What do we do? Kind of thing. So that's the concern, is that the policy, like I said, if the policy shift had happened 3 years ago, then then we would have been like, okay, so here's how we're planning. But it just shifted us.
The goalposts moved.
The goalposts moved very suddenly on us, is what has happened. So
Okay, so let's kind of bracket the situation with Troy, because that's a very specific case with specific circumstances, which I have said to Marianne that I think, obviously we'll continue a conversation about what remedies might be available. But for the rest of everybody else, putting aside the Troy case, does this policy make sense? Does the distinction in processes between practice and research make sense? I think the intention here was that some of the extra scrutiny that was placed on doctoral programs in the previous guidelines really had to do with the research doctorates. And so the goal of this was to open up some more flexibility on the practice doctorates, especially in those fields where things are moving into a more doctorate focused profession. Oh, y'all are fine with it aside from, obviously moving the goalposts.
Well, I have a question on that with the documentation to me so far makes sense with the changes, but as far as implementation of when, and this is just for my education on the process. When this new policy, when policies like this are finalized, when do they take effect?
That's a good question. So we talked a little bit about the process earlier, how this is going to go through with the commission. They would ideally grant final approval for any changes in September. And my understanding is that the policy is in effect after that. You will sometimes see on live policies where it'll have a date at the bottom. This one is a new one, so it doesn't have that. But the other ones will have, approved, amended on X, goes into effect on Y. Those are usually, and the ones I've seen sometimes can be about a month apart. I don't know if there's like a reason from the state regulatory standpoint of why that month is in place, but let's imagine that either it will go into effect immediately or it will go into effect by the December 8th meeting.
It seems like on large policy changes like this, that's kind of does put people like Troy in a box where they can't react in a timely fashion, especially when they've been making strategic plans. Generally, shouldn't policies like this have a longer implementation time frame to allow institutions to make adjustments?
So I will confess that this is my first go around with the administrative procedures. We have been talking about this for a while. But do you have a recommendation?
I'd say 6 months to a year on big changes. I mean, I can sympathize with Troy's predicament. If we had been here at UAB making strategic plans over the last year and a half to do something that would be a major expansion for us, and then to have a policy change that it only gives us a month to react to, that's pretty bad. And I agree with what John Bauer just said there. We need some type of process, grandfather clause, or a longer implementation time frame to allow institutions to make changes, because institutions don't turn on a dime, that's for sure. Even my background is banking and insurance, and when I came from that environment, highly regulated, even in those highly regulated environments, major policy changes didn't take effect in a month. We had time to change business processes.
Yeah, Jared, let me just, from someone who came to a state institution after serving multiple private institutions, yes, some institutions do turn on a dime when they want to create something new. So I think it is not considering how we might compete with those institutions.
Oh yeah, that's definitely a good point, Katrina. Private institutions have more leeway, I guess, with how they're managed. But I don't, from a state type organization, I don't think that's I just don't think that's a good time frame to try and implement things, especially on large changes. I think there's like there was suggested a grandfather clause, or there needs to be some other type of process for implementing these things that allows for the adjustments and doesn't totally scuttle, long-term or changes or plans that have been in the works for a long time. So, I mean, imagine their predicament right now. It's like she said, they're building a new research building. If this policy goes into effect like this, and it does delay them out, 3-4 years to be able to actually take advantage of those investments, that's a lot of opportunity cost that they're going to experience. So just my 2 cents.
Anybody else? Okay, so our major concern that I am taking from this is the method and time frame for implementation. Potential specific cases like the one we've talked about with Troy, where things are moving and the potential impact on them. I do believe we can consider this and come up with some remedy that is specific to the situation. What I'm hoping to hear from y'all is about, okay, I haven't heard any concerns about this policy, say 4 years down the road, once we've got through, all cases that are up till now. And is there anybody from the kind of aspiring practice-focused doctorate institutions for whom this policy actually loosens up some regulations? Is this something that is welcome, or it's just not really going to matter for y'all?
It's welcomed on our end.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kim, from JSU. All right. Is there anybody else who wants to comment on this one before we go to the other policies? Because I do want to make sure we can talk about strategic benefit, which is related to this question, and some of the other changes to the program proposals. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go back up here to proposals for new academic programs. So this is the section 300-2103, which is about new instructional program proposals for institutions. We held an open forum on this quite a while back. And the language that you'll see here pretty much reflects the changes that were discussed back then. So this policy hasn't been amended in almost 25 years. It's quite a while. And there are some outdated things and some flexibilities that we're hoping to introduce. Similar to the other, the structure of the other section, we've got a clean draft here. In this case, the clean draft uses black to show the existing language because it is actually a policy that exists, where the other one is a new policy that is brought from other guidelines. So we use blue to try and show that. Then we've got, we'll slow down and go through this a little bit more in a minute. We've got a marked up draft that shows everything that was added, things that were taken away, various formatting infelicities that happen when you deal with track changes. And then toward the end is the existing policy. So anybody, and here's where I mentioned before, it's filed and then it goes into effect. You see that? So existing version, if anybody wants to see, there's some outdated stuff. So those of you who are on the call from the Alabama Community College System, the current policy has you guys being ADPE, the Alabama Department of Post-Secondary Education. So we definitely gotta at least bring it up in the 21st century here. All right, so let's go through the marked up version so everybody can see all of the work that we have considered up to this point. All right, back to the beginning of this section. So just so you all know, the way that this is structured, had a purpose and responsibility statement. We're not really looking to change those. There was not a section on definitions in terms of what is considered a degree and how this applies to degrees versus certificates. So most of this is language that's been added from IPED's definitions. And perhaps related is this whole doctorate thing, which is in some ways confusing, but we can talk about that. And then some general guidance on submitting proposals. And then it goes into review of, here's where we go, trying to review of 2-year college programs of instruction is the first section. So all of your associate and your long certificates. And then the next section, we try to put a divider here to help out, is for baccalaureate programs. And then there is a third section for evaluation of graduate programs. All right, and then finally, program proposals above the instructional role recognized by the commission. And so this is the language that was taken from that other guidelines document about specific program proposals and how those specific proposals would be considered by AIC using the strategic benefit standard of analysis. Okay. All right, y'all with me so far on the structure of the policy? So this was the original structure that was in the existing version, so we're generally keeping that. We're adding definitions, so these levels pertain to IPEDS, so that's noted up here. Level 2, we're calling this a long certificate. Community colleges call it the CER. We're defining this in terms of hours. Level 3, associate degree, baccalaureate degree, master's, ed specialist. And then we get to our doctorates, and IPEDS uses these levels, 17, 18, 19. The 18s are your professional doctorates. Those are typically, we see a lot in the healthcare field, MDs, OTDs, PTs, PharmDs, DNPs, DSWs. Those would be considered professional. Research doctorate by IPEDS includes Doctor of Philosophy, but it also includes the Ed.D. This is one instance where the IPEDS definition of a quote unquote research doctorate does not align with what we called in the other section a practice-focused doctorate. So the Ed.D. wouldn't be considered a professional doctorate because you still produce a scholarly product of research, but by those in the field, it is not considered at the same level as a PhD, so then it gets put in this practice category. So that is just something that is difficult to spell out here, but we can obviously add more language in if needed, but in this section, we're defining the degrees based on the IPEDS levels. Marianne, you came on screen. Did you want to pop in?
No, I just realized that I had hit that and then I was just hitting it back. Sorry.
Okay, the reason the levels I will say is important is because of how AIC encodes these degrees into our system program inventory, and then your institutions submit completers to us using this numeric code for your degree. And so this actually spelling out the level code is in an effort to make those two things work better. There had not been clear delineation that created some major confusion in the submission of completers. So that's what this is trying to resolve. Okay, excuse me, submission of proposals. So there will be procedures and guidelines. So that is what we mean by the form. And then we will receive the form, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get on the agenda or be approved. And we go into the 2-year college system process. Why does AIC not follow the IPEDS definition for the Ed.D? We do. Can you explain what you mean?
Well, if you go back up to the levels there, why you mentioned that earlier, you said the AIC doesn't classify the ed degree the same in the earlier section where IPEDS does here. You said there's a difference. Why is
Yes.
there a difference?
So in terms of IPEDS, the level 17, we're including the Ed D in level 17. So we match iPads for the purposes of encoding completers.
Okay,
Up until 2 years ago, I believe AIC did code an Ed D as an 18 because we recognized it as a practice-focused doctorate.
okay,
That created quite a bit of confusion with your institutions, everybody's institutional research offices,
hmm,
because the research office, who are doing the counting of completers, wanted to count Ed D as a 17 because of the guidance iPads did. So
Right.
we made that change.
Yeah.
Now, when we get to the granting of instructional role, which is what we were talking about before,
hmm,
we could make the case that an Ed D is a research focused doctorate, but I think you're going to get a lot of pushback. You're going to get pushback from those who have PhDs in education and say, oh, that's the practitioner side versus our academic research side. So maybe we, obviously research doctorate here is the terminology iPads uses. So maybe we need to come up with another term in the role that really just only applies to PhDs. Maybe we just call it PhD granting. There are a few other research doctorates out there. The Doctor of Science sometimes gets thrown in there. So we match iPads. That's the thing in this
Okay.
section. The
All right.
confusion is around role and how we're talking
Right.
about research-focused institution in the role section. So I am open to new terminology there.
Okay, yeah, just from a, exactly like you said, from a data perspective, I take issue anytime we deviate from definitions. We're saying, oh, but in this case, it's this. That to me is always a red flag and problematic. So, all right, but thank you for the clarification.
Kim, go ahead.
Yes, I think you just answered. So even with the doctorate other, these definitions don't necessarily pertain to the role definitions. Is that correct?
That's what I'm kind of highlighting. It's something that we may need to spend a little more time thinking about. But if we look back at the role definition, so I didn't have it open as a separate tab, so bear with me just a moment here.
Because we have an EDD, and I know you know that, but so in just thinking about moving forward, and counting the 3 or whatever, that's what I was concerned about.
Right. So here's what we were just talking about with role practice doctorate, and we say that includes all of the level 18s as well as the Ed D and DBA. And then research doctorate degree granting, and maybe this is the term that I'm talking, that maybe we conceptually, so for the potential implementation hazards for some institutions, y'all were conceptually okay with this language, but what I'm pointing out is the Ed D crosses over, and we tried to make that clear in both cases. Ed D is in this one, but when we're talking about actually submitting data, let me see. And Gordon Mills is saying, what about the DBA? When we're actually submitting the data, we get to where I'm talking about here. Yeah, the Ed D would be 17. And Gordon says the DBA also has a level 17 on it for the purposes of iPads. But when we're talking about role, we're putting it with the DBA as part of a practice suite of doctorates. Okay, so what do y'all think? Is it clear enough? Clear as mud? Generally confusing? Needs further attention? So nobody's given me the stink eye, so I'm going to guess that we're clear enough. And if y'all do have specific feedback on that, you know, feel free to send it to me or put it in the chat. But I do want to continue on because we're on the home stretch of our, sure, we get through the rest of it here. All right, so now we're talking about 2-year college programs. So those of y'all from the community colleges, this pertains to you. We've updated your name. We've taken out this section around the intent to submit a program application, ISPA, which is their version of the NISP, which isn't to say that the community college system couldn't require this in-house. It's just that AIC is not going to require that to come to us ahead of time. There's quite a bit of language in here about how the review is going to take place, joint review. They can, and some of this we're keeping, but really our goal in eliminating some of this language around formal requests and how the process goes is that it can be more flexible. And it doesn't really make sense from a policy writing standpoint to codify the actual process when you could have an accompanying, here's the procedures document that can be more flexible and change depending on agreed upon situations and needs. Okay. So this language again is about how the ACCS would have reviewed the applications from its own institutions. We're proposing to eliminate that and leave that to the community college system. And then this language around how long it's going to take the commission to take action on the program. 90 days is the time between our quarterly meetings, and we found that 60 days just that didn't make sense. The commission can't act in 60 days on anything because we have to go through our quarterly meeting process. Okay. All right, y'all, are there questions on this one? Okay. All right, the next one, we're talking about baccalaureate programs. We're proposing to eliminate this entire paragraph, which is about the need to submit the NISP, how the NISP comes in. The 2-month waiting period is also in here and a little bit below. Again, some procedural details that we don't feel need to be reflected in the actual regulatory policy. And then we are proposing to include some additional language that describes how our review proceeds. So this language that you see here around how we're going to consider these factors were previously included in like a guidelines document. And the guidelines document, this is kind of condensed. There were like 8 or 12 factors and we've kind of streamlined them down. Now we got a question in the chat from Trish at ACCS. Thank you, Trish, about the new form. Yes, there will ideally be a new form. Yes, we want your input on the form, and there will be time for the form to be implemented. So I'll make sure that you're in the loop on that. And the form will be shorter. We've also been working, I've got my colleague Stephanie Dolan working on it with a work group of folks who are looking at the SACS alignment. So how to make the form much easier for you all to cut and paste from materials that you have to do for substantive change and other things. And that way, hopefully we'll have an easier, more streamlined way of submitting items to us. Yes, we will still be using the portal to submit the new information. Yeah, we can't go back to email. Can't go back. All right. Okay, so staff recommendation and monitoring of post-implementation, that's what's going to be described in the next section in more detail. And then this brings us to evaluation of graduate programs. So this is, more specific in some ways about what constitutes a graduate program. It does take away the NISP, as we saw with the other kinds of degree reviews. And this was some language, you guys see the comment here. Considerations for peer review. These were discussed with the Council of Graduate Deans at their retreat. And ACGD wanted to make sure that these factors were in their wheelhouse to consider. There certainly could be additional ones. But some of this very specific process that had been in the policy before about proposing institutions sending copies 3 weeks later, they do this, receipt, they do that. We're taking that out because, again, it just seems it is divergent from the way that we do things right now, and also seems to be limiting the ability of the reviewers to do what they need to do. In terms of the review criteria for graduate program proposals, there was an additional clause added in here compared to the baccalaureate and associate programs. Higher level of scrutiny due to increased resources and capacity that programs require. The factors are more or less the same. Resources and capacity, potential duplication, opportunities for collaboration, those are all the same as what you saw, just with this higher scrutiny applied to graduate versus undergraduate programs. Okay. All right. Well, do you all have questions on those standard review processes at the undergraduate or graduate level? No. Okay, we've been trying to talk about this a lot with stakeholders, so hopefully this is a welcome change and is not surprising. All right, so here begins a new section on consideration of specific proposals above the instructional role. So the previous section, we talked about changing our instructional role and for moving up to a level that is outside your institution's defined mission and role. The institution would need to go through this process of proposing, implementing program proposals using this section. So the new program proposals in a single discipline, as long as the program accords with state statutes. So that gets to, again, the legislative authority here. And in order to seek approval for a program, most of this language that you'll see down here comes directly from the guidelines document that we saw before, which is this document. Okay, so strategic benefit beyond the standard criteria for program review must contribute the strategic benefit, which we are defining as significant, meaningful benefit for the state. And all of these kind of subsections here came from that other guidelines document. There are some sections that are highlighted here that have to do with duplication. I know that is of interest to institutions who are sharing service areas with other institutions and generally throughout the state. And so when an institution is seeking to get a proposal at a higher degree level, that is using the strategic benefit threshold, then the standards and considerations for duplication do take into account anticipated impact on the enrollments at the institutions that are already in the service area, giving those other institutions in the service area deference, and trying to see what else. unnecessary duplication is somewhat similar to what you see for regular programs. All right, y'all with me so far? Okay, so that's for strategic benefit. Those who wrote the guidelines, so again, that's this previous document, did conceive of scenarios where there were specialized accreditation for a specific program, and that accreditation could change to a different level. Meaning if you, I think we've seen this in some of the, I want to say occupational therapy or athletic training programs where the accreditor previously requested either a bachelor or master level degree as the professional standard, and institutions would, get approval for that in their role. But then the field changed, and what was required at the bachelor's moved to a master's, or master's moved to a doctorate, and that might be above the institution's role. And should that happen, then the institution can apply for AIC review under this specialized accreditation, meaning that we had a program that was at the professional level, the accreditation standard changed, and now we want to continue and offer our program. And so we would review it under this second criteria. All right. Here's where we've got the institution maybe approved for up to 3 before seeking an expansion of instructional role. You'll notice that this doesn't include the language that you have to apply between the 3rd and the 4th. We leave that over, that the section that will now deal with that is over with the instructional role that we talked about earlier. Okay, and then we've got these couple of clauses here at the end. Program implementation, which would be a 2-year time frame, unless another implementation time frame is granted. Sometimes that does happen. We've had a couple of institutions come through with a big professional specialized accreditation proposal that needs a certain lead time. It's going to take them 3 years to get through the accreditor's queue, and so if we know that up front, then we can approve that longer implementation timeframe. Okay, what questions do y'all have? I know we've got about 10 minutes left. And so I definitely want to make sure our issues get treated, but I also want to look at the last policy that we're hoping to bring forward. Okay. All right, so here's the last one. This one is much shorter. All right, so we just talked about section 3, evaluation of new program proposals. Section 4, immediately following, is about approving, disapproving, deferring, withdrawing new programs of instruction. Okay. So in this section, it was last amended not too long ago. And there were specific reasons for that we'll explain as we go through. But there were things that I think should be included around post-implementation to reflect the current practice that AIC uses. Okay, so let's similarly clean draft. Let's go to the marked up draft here. So in the marked up draft, you can see that we are proposing actually to change the title of this section so that instead of having disapproval, deferral, withdrawal, we have approval of new programs and requirements for post-implementation, which were discussed in this document, just not, we would like that to be reflected in the title. We did add a little bit of language around commission's responsibility for viability. So anybody who's submitted us a proposal or been at one of our meetings, you know that that's a big topic of discussion. And the scope is that this only applies to the programs that had to go through the approval process in the previous section we talked about. So all of those IPEDS level 2, 3, 5, 7, 8 Ed.S, and then all the doctoral ones. All right, so keeping language that was in there before, commission actions. A commission can approve the program of instruction or disapprove. We took out this second clause around disapproval. It seemed to be a very specific circumstance. That should be covered in the bylaws anyway. If a program receives a favorable vote of majority, but doesn't receive a favorable vote by a majority of members present, like this has to do specifically with the scenario that not all of the commission members, like there's a quorum at the meeting to vote on the proposal. And like I said, that should be covered by bylaws. The commission could also defer a proposal. This has not happened while I've been with AIC, but as you can see, this text is in black because it was part of the existing policy. We are also changing the withdrawal. You can see we kept the text, but whereas approval, disapproval, and deferral are actions the commission can take, withdrawal is an action that an institution can take on its own program. Then we move into the post-implementation. This is where you're seeing a lot of the red text. And what's written here reflects the practice that we currently do. And it had not been codified in our regulations yet. So hopefully no surprises here. Any new degree program has a 7-year post-implementation period. I believe the change in 2018 had to do with the period of post-implementation. I think that was when it got changed from 5 years to 7 years. So we're keeping the 7-year. We're specifying the condition on graduates, as you all have heard, and when do program proposals, there's a minimum viability standard that is set out in law in the Code of Alabama. And that's the reference if anybody wants to go in and check it out. I'll make that a little bigger. So for baccalaureate, associate, and long certificates, 7.5 graduates, all this language about vocational and technical is also included in the legislation. Master's degrees have viability at 3.75, associate, education specialist at 3.0. One thing we have added, this came up in a specific scenario around the Master of Fine Arts as a terminal subdoctoral degree. So the terminal degree in the field, but it's not a doctorate, but it's also not really a master's. Those terminal subdoctoral degrees would also be considered at the same scrutiny level as your education specialist. An institution, if they wanted us to review it as a terminal subdoctorate, would need to tell us that as part of the program proposal. And then doctoral degrees are 2.25. So for the most part, this just, aside from the terminal subdoctoral, codifies what we already do. Condition on new enrollments. So this does make an intervention that would hopefully create more structure and be welcomed by you all as institutions. For new enrollments, the current state of affairs is we review new enrollments based on what you all put in your business plan. So you tell us how many enrollments on average per year, and we use that as the condition. So what we found is that there are cases where an institution at the end of its post-implementation period after 7 years will meet the graduation viability standard, but fall below its projections for enrollments because those projections were too ambitious. And so this condition on new enrollments is intended to make that situation not happen, because the commission does not want to review amendments to post-implementation conditions when you under predicted your enrollments. So this would peg the new enrollment condition to the viability standard as 25% greater than the viability standard. So basically, we would encourage you to put what you really think you're gonna get. And then similar to the viability, AIC will use this minimum as what we would hold you to for your post-implementation. The 25% greater is intended to account for attrition and enrollment fluctuations. We do know that with doctoral degrees in particular, sometimes the fluctuation and attrition is really not a factor in the enrollment, and they may want to have a slightly different and new enrollment standard. But again, we would need the institution to tell us so that that would be part of the staff recommendation and approval. So my hope is that you all see that this is intended to be more structured, more clear, create less uncertainty, and generally help you all. But I'll stop here. I know we got 4 minutes left to see if you all have questions on this. Okay, no questions. I'm guessing that that's, you can always email me afterward with your questions or comments. All right, finally, so we've got continuing through our post-implementation conditions. We've got the, graduates, the new enrollments, then reporting. So previously this was considered assessment. And you all have probably heard me say before that we are not an accreditor. We are, evaluating your learning outcomes and objectives as to whether they have been met through your assessment process is not something that really fell within our wheelhouse. So we have changed this condition to reporting, meaning you have to submit your post-implementation report. It needs to address those conditions that are important or that are required for you to meet for your program to be off of monitoring. And then lastly, there are some cases where additional conditions are needed. You'll see some black text here because this was part of the original policy. It has to do with specialized accreditation in a couple of cases. There have been a couple of scenarios where an institution is bringing forward a program that could potentially or will definitely compete with an existing program at your own institution. So think about the scenario of an option. So the option, that means all the graduates are going to the parent program and the option is the child's. When that option becomes its own standalone program, it's going to take some of the would-be graduates away from your parent program into the new program. And in those cases, we have been applying this condition that the original parent program maintain its viability. So we, at the end of the post-implementation monitoring, will look at viability for both programs. And like I said, this is something we've already been doing. We're just putting it into the policy. All right, implementation window and post-implementation review. So if a program meets all of its conditions, it's no longer monitored. And then if a program has not met one or more of its conditions, then in keeping with the policy, or I guess the way AIC had operated up to this point, it would be recommended for deletion, which does not mean that AIC deletes it. And what that means is we have a conversation with your institution around how you're going to remediate this program or whether your institution does want to move forward with deletion. And this is where we get the amendments to post-implementation conditions. Okay, so I know that was a lot. We breezed through that last one, but like I said, it mostly reflects our current practice. We're right here on the button at 1:30. So if anybody wants to hang out and ask me more specific questions, please do. And for those of you who are eager to get back to your other obligations, I appreciate your time, and we will be sharing this recording. We'll share it out with you all by email. And we'll also post it to our big webinar page. Okay, thanks, everybody.
Thank you.